Chapter 7. Sunset Regrets. 27 years later. Kingston, Jamaica. 3:02 p.m. On May 18, the local meteorologists in Jamaica predicted that the following day the sun would set at approximately 6:04 p.m. The regional weather channels, as well as Google and ChatGPT, confirmed it, much to the satisfaction of many sunset enthusiasts. But everyone else who cared to find out without approximation only needed to use their senses and realized that the sunset would be aesthetically appealing. DeVillan Manslayer was in Kingston at 2:15 p.m. on May 19, browsing the internet to find out the exact time of the sunset that day. He was a businessman, late 40s, tall, broad, bald, and was perhaps the most self-aware man on earth. He knew that he could steal the joy out of any heart and the oxygen from any room and the beauty from any setting. He was sitting on a reclining chair on the pentagon-shaped balcony of the second floor of his white palatial mansion, topless and barefooted, sipping on a bottle of red stripe beer and viewing a scenery to be painted, photographed, filmed, and cherished. He looked into the sky again, at 2:23 p.m. There were no rain clouds and no heavy winds, but no humidity neither. It was a clear, bright afternoon, and it promised him a beautiful sunset. Then at 2:25 p.m., he was reading the Holy Bible, the book of Ephesians, chapter 4 verses 26 to 27 to be exact. He reread the verses twice and prayed again to God, in the name of Jesus Christ. But, minutes later, he was frowning again. And he looked down at his gun, which was resting like a lazy mongrel pup on a plastic stool next to him. DeVillan picked up the weapon with his left hand and admired it for a moment. It was a black Glock 45 pistol. A legacy of his past major trauma. Meticulously, he began brushing it off, blowing off dust, shining away smudges and grease spots, and fitting bullets into the magazine. Next, he slapped the magazine into place, liking the sharp, clacking sound it made in the process. And then he exhaled a gush of breath. He then switched the weapon to his right hand. Just in case of a sudden attack. No one can ever predict what might happen even in a gated community. He stared at the Glock some more, picturing his enemy at the place of execution, in the moment of the hit. Dismissing his insecurities, he slowly placed the gun beside the beer bottle on top of the plastic stool and tried to smile his anxiety away. But he failed again. In a minute or so from now, his wife's warm, fluffy embrace would soothe him, calm him down, and give him a good reason to stay home. But if his beautiful wife should fail to help him too, what else could he do? He, most definitely, wouldn't dare get his two young adult sons involved. He leaned back slowly, and steepled his fingers rigidly under his clean-shaven chin, and sighed heavily. He wouldn't want to regret surrendering to this urge to kill a human being. His brows furrowed at the possibility of failing to pull the trigger. No. He couldn't afford to fail, or to use a more accurate phrase, miss the mark, which he had found out is the literal definition of the word sin. He rubbed his head with both hands, looking down at the tiled floor, seeing only a montage of his distant past and near future, and a stupid young man named Joey Simpleman who was shot at the age of 20, and who also used to be Mark McKenzie up until the age of 10. He also remembered that beautiful girl named Grace Williams, who used to be Joey's favorite person in the entire world, up until her death at the age of 18. Killed right before his eyes. Groaning softly, DeVillan quickly vaporized the memory of these two victims of Brian Reeder, who had promised that Reeders would take out Joey's relatives one by one, but who also was just released from prison on parole, after serving only 26 years. Strange. Only 26 short, privileged years. DeVillan shook his head slowly. The burden of vengeance weighed heavily on his shoulders now. Plus, in the coming hour, he would be heading out to find justice for Grace, broad, far-reaching, far-fetched, long-overdue justice. Which he deserved to have, without personal, mental hindrances. So, at 3 p.m., DeVillan rose from the chair, picked up his gun, and held it parallel to his right leg as he sauntered through an automatic double-slide door into the state-of-the-art living room, all the while imagining a target on the back of his head. But he was safe. The doors and windows were bullet-proofed. And figuratively, his skin was tough, his back was broad enough for at least another bullet, and his heart was made of steel, and conspicuousness was the name of his favorite game. The game of life and death. At 4:30 p.m. that same day, DeVillan made an anonymous phone call to his pastor friend, using an old Samsung mobile phone. He told the pastor,
"Meet me at 37 Malway Road, 5:41 this afternoon."
The rest of the dialogue was concise and precise. Then at 4:46 p.m., DeVillan's black Prado backed slowly out of his garage, then turned right on the avenue and later turned right onto the main street. The tinted windows were all the way up. The AC was kicking. The leathery scent of the vehicle was pleasant. He, too, smelled rich, and looked the part, in navy blue jacket, white shirt, no tie, a silver chain with an ink pendant, 3 silver rings, a diamond wristwatch, matching pants and brown, Italian dress shoes. His gun was locked and loaded and sleeping inside the glove box. Plus, the road was scanty, improving his mood. Until 4:51 p.m., when his phone rang, and he placed the call on the car speaker.
"My good pastor, what's going on, sir?"
he said curiously but respectfully, anticipating the best news but bracing for the worst news. The pastor's voice filled the van.
"First of all, DeVillan, I have to push up our meeting today to around 6 o'clock, due to unforeseen circumstances. I'm sorry. But
I don't like sudden changes, pastor."
Be patient, Dev.
DeVillan killed the call. And then he began swearing at every other driver in his way, wishing they could hear his gritty voice and not just his ill-mannered horn. He slapped the steering wheel.
"Good move, Pastor Moore. I guess you have a perfect plan for Richie too. But we shall see."
At 5:38 p.m., at a public park, DeVillan met with a man who had shoulder-length locks. They discreetly scheduled a hit. DeVillan gave the man the name and description of the target, the place, and the time of execution. Then he made a hefty down payment to the serious hitman and reminded him of the heftier prize of failing. Then both men parted company, like two normal people on a cozy day. Seconds later, DeVillan called back the pastor. And, without apologizing to the clergyman, DeVillan rescheduled the meeting with him to 5:50 p.m. this same day, on DeVillan's terms and conditions.
"And make sure Richie comes with you,"
he added as a stern reminder. And there were no objections from the pastor. At 5:42 p.m., as DeVillan drove through the downtown area of Kingston, he noticed that the sky was bruised all over, more so the western horizon. And it wasn't appealing, one bit. Then at 5:45 p.m., he was motionless behind the steering wheel, having parked on a soft shoulder of the harbor view leg of a highway. Then he grumbled to himself.
"Richie Reeder, just like Brian, you are one lucky son of A."
He stopped short of shouting, and instead slapped the wheel hard. His eyes became glossy, his cheeks became wet, and his face got hotter and uglier. And through slightly blurred vision and the open window, he watched the sun sinking closer to the wide Sargasso Caribbean Sea, its orange tentacles crawling all over the darkening, dancing water, as silhouette birds jetted or flopped by gracefully, and as a long freight ship burdened with containers sailed in the mid-ground towards a pier. Then he shook his head slowly. Then he cracked a broad grin and looked into the overhead mirror again. And this time the face that was staring back at him burst out laughing. Any passerby might have thought that DeVillan was cracking up in tears to a joke that someone told him on a Bluetooth phone call. But DeVillan didn't care about perceptions during his most passionate moments. Because there was still another day to get his enemy. And then the sun could go down as a blazing ball of glory. For anger would have given up the throne of DeVillan's heart to blissful satisfaction. He dried his face, started the engine, slid his window up, brightened the headlamps, checked his mirrors and blind spots, and then pushed out into the road and drove back in the direction of his home. But he wouldn't be home for a long while, to his wife and his remaining bottles of Red Stripe beer. No, he was heading somewhere else to meet at least one of his makers, those who, 27 years ago, had transformed him from being Joey Simpleman, the simpleton who trusted people too readily, and into becoming DeVillan Manslayer, the man who now hated most things in life, even the most beautiful sunsets. And he had no regrets.